When I try to remember when exactly my son turned into a leech, I can't give a specific date. It must have happened gradually, like a disease that first appears as a slight weakness and then takes over the whole body. Now in my 76th year, I often reflect on this as I sit by the window in the living room of my home in Overland Park, where I have lived most of my life. My name is Randall Higginbotham. It's an odd surname that was laughed at in high school, but now appears on the sign of a small but profitable printing company called Higginbotham Printing. I started it 43 years ago when I was full of energy and hope. Now I'm just an old man with bad knees, thin gray hair, and tired eyes. Although, according to my doctor, Dr. Birch, I'm in great shape for my age. Apparently, the constant stresses have kept me from relaxing and getting fat. 10 years ago, I buried Phyllis, my wife of 45 years. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and merciless, like a stabbing. Since then, I've lived alone in our big house, which now seems empty and humming. We bought it in our 40s when things were booming at the print shop, and it was filled with laughter, the smell of freshly baked apple pie, and the stomping of children's feet. Our son Edwin grew up here, playing on this lawn, riding his bike down this street. Edwin is now 49. He has his own two-story house in an upscale part of town, a German car, a wife Audrey, and no children. They decided children would interfere with their lifestyle. He also hasn't had a steady job in 7 years. "I'm looking for opportunities, Dad," he says every time I ask that question. Opportunities, of course. In 7 years, you could find something if you really looked. But why look when there's me, an old single dad with a business that brings in a steady income and an empty house where every corner reminds me of Phyllis? I never would have thought my own son would use my loss and loneliness against me. But it happened so naturally, so imperceptibly. At first, there were the occasional requests for help. "Dad, we're having a little financial difficulty. Could you lend? I'll pay you back next month." Then the loans turned into gifts. "Oh, Daddy, you don't want us to pay it back, do you? It's not like you have anywhere to spend the money, and we need to maintain status." Then came the monthly dues. "Dad, we're counting on your support, as always." And finally, full entitlement to my wallet. "Daddy, we need to upgrade our furniture, our car, our wardrobe, our household appliances." And Audrey, my sister-in-law, is a separate story. I've never seen a woman able to spend other people's money with such ease. In 21 years of marriage to my son, she never worked a day. "I have too gentle a nature for the office," she says with that smile of hers that never reaches her eyes. Her gentle nature doesn't stop her from spending $10,000 per shopping trip. I remember Phyllis being against this marriage. "Randall," she said, "that girl only sees our son as a wallet." She was right, except that I was the purse, not Edwin. Phyllis has always been wiser than me, especially when it comes to people. I'm a businessman. I see numbers, not hearts. After Phyllis died, they started visiting me more often. Not to support me in my grief, no. It was to make sure I didn't go off the deep end and spend their future inheritance on something stupid. "Dad, you shouldn't donate so much to cancer research," Edwin told me a month after the funeral. "Mom wouldn't want you throwing money around." Mom wouldn't. It became his favorite phrase. Mom wouldn't want you to sell the business and travel. Mom wouldn't want you to move to a smaller house. Mom wouldn't want you to date other women. As if he knew what Phyllis would want. At the time, I was too heartbroken to resist. It seemed to me that if I supported my son, a piece of Phyllis would still be with me. Silly, isn't it? I continued to work at the print shop, even though I could have sold the business long ago and retired. I love printing. The smell of ink, the hum of the machines, the stacks of freshly printed paper, all gave me a sense of order and control that was sorely lacking in my personal life. The business was still generating a good income. Not that I was rich, but I had enough to live a decent life and help my son. Except that this help had become the norm, an expected entitlement rather than a thank you. Every month I wrote a check for a large sum of money and gave it to Edwin. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with Audrey. She always kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Daddy. You're our savior." And all I could see in her eyes was calculation. I remember one particularly painful incident 3 years ago. I had minor knee surgery, nothing serious, but I couldn't get around properly for a couple weeks. I called Edwin and asked him to come over and help with the shopping and around the house. Dad, this isn't a good time, he said. Audrey and I have a spa weekend planned. You know, we're really tired. What are you tired of, Edwin? I asked bitterly. Idleness? Don't start that again, he sighed. You know I'm looking for a job at my level. His level. Edwin graduated from college with a degree in business administration. Average grades, no initiative. I offered him a chance to join the family business, but printing is so last century, Dad. However, he accepted money earned from that last century without hesitation. After that knee situation, I hired a visiting au pair, Beatriz, a nice woman from Guatemala who comes 3 times a week, cooks, cleans, and just talks to me. She shows more care than my own son, and for that I pay her 10 times less than I give Edwin each month. But even that wasn't enough. A year ago, Edwin started hinting that he and Audrey needed to update the house. Dad, our roof needs repair. And do you know how much building materials cost these days? What about getting a job and paying for your roof yourself? I asked, feeling the irritation rising inside. You know it's not a good time to get a job, he countered. Besides, all that money will be mine someday anyway. Why not help now while you can appreciate it? Just like that, right to your face. All that money's going to be mine someday anyway. I remember freezing then, looking at my son who I once held in my arms and taught to ride a bike. When and how had he turned into this cold, calculating man waiting for me to die? I paid for their roof, and the new living room furniture, and for the Bahamas vacation they needed for their health. I kept paying because it had become a habit, the path of least resistance, because somewhere deep inside I still hoped that my son would change, that he would remember what he used to be like before he married Audrey, before money was the only thing we talked about. Our meetings became torture. It was the same every time. Fake smiles, superficial conversations about the weather and politics, and then the inevitable switch to finances. By the way, Dad, and what followed was a list of their needs and wants that I had to splurge on. I noticed the look on Audrey's face change when I didn't immediately agree to another spending spree. Her smile would become strained, her eyes cold. Of course, if you can't afford it, she'd say with the implication that I was a stingy old man, unwilling to help my own son. And Edwin never took my side, always giving in to his wife. We hardly ever talked about my life, my interests, my problems. When I started talking about the printing press, Edwin would yawn and Audrey would stare at the phone. When I mentioned back pain or trouble sleeping, they quickly changed the subject. They were only interested in my life in the context of my bank account. Sometimes I thought about ending this financial support, just saying no. But then I would imagine them stopping coming altogether, and I would be overcome with fear of loneliness. How pathetic that sounds. An old man paying for his own son to come visit him. But I kept doing it, month after month, year after year. Only recently has something started to change in me. Maybe it's age and the realization that my time is limited. Maybe it was fatigue from the constant demands. Or maybe it was a quiet rage that slowly grew inside me. With every disrespectful word, every empty visit, every indifferent look. I began to notice that it was getting harder and harder for me to smile when they arrived. It's harder and harder to sign checks. It's harder and harder to listen to their endless stories about how hard their lives are, even though they don't work and live on everything. A week ago, Edwin called and suggested we meet at a restaurant. Audrey and I want to treat you, Dad, he said with unusual enthusiasm. I agreed, though I immediately sensed a catch. In 20 years, they'd never paid for me at a restaurant. There was always a reason. They'd forgotten their wallet, or there was a credit card problem, or next time, Dad, sure. I knew it would be me paying this time too, and I knew they had something planned, something that required a lot of money. The anticipation of new demands clutched my heart, but I agreed to the meeting anyway, out of habit, out of inertia. That strange hope that didn't want to die in my heart. But something told me that this dinner would be different from the previous ones, that my patience was running out, that even the strongest rubber band will tear at some point if you stretch it too far. The phone call came Friday night as I was sorting through old photo albums. I've been doing that a lot lately, flipping through pages of the past, taking in the faces that get farther away every year. Photographs are strange things. A moment is frozen in them forever, and people keep changing. I stare for a long time at the picture of Edwin and I standing by the lake. He was about 9 years old at the time. His eyes were shining with that sincere childlike joy that I hadn't seen in a long time. When the ringtone of my phone began to play, I almost dropped the album. My son's name on the screen made me frown. He usually called on Tuesdays, shortly before I transferred money to him. Friday's call broke the routine. "Dad, are you okay?" Edwin's voice sounded suspiciously cheerful. "I'm fine," I answered cautiously. "Did something happen?" "Why should anything happen?" He let out a short laugh. "Couldn't a son just call his father to see how he was doing?" "He could if he did it once in a while without an ulterior motive. But I didn't. Audrey and I were thinking," he continued after a pause, "that we haven't gotten together in a while. How about dinner on Sunday? We'd like to invite you." "Invite me?" I didn't hide my surprise. "You mean you'll pay?" "Of course, Dad." His voice sounded a little insulted. "You always help us. Now it's our turn. We have reservations at Le Provençal for 7 o'clock. It's the new French restaurant downtown. Everyone's talking about it." I knew that restaurant. It opened a couple months ago, and the prices were exorbitant, even by Overland Park standards. Something was wrong here. In 20 years, Edwin had never called just to see how I was doing, and he'd certainly never offered to pay for dinner at an expensive restaurant. "What's wrong, Edwin?" I asked bluntly. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Nothing's wrong." His voice became slightly strained. "We just want to spend time with you. A family reunion, so to speak. Audrey doesn't think we pay enough attention to family ties." "Audrey cares about family ties. Of course she does." The same Audrey who, in 20 years, had never once asked about my health beyond a formal, "How are you, Daddy?" before discussing her new purchases. "Okay," I agreed, already knowing I'd regret it. 7 o'clock on Sunday. "Great. Audrey's going to love it," Edwin said. "By the way, have you seen the TV coverage of the new exhibition at the City Museum? You'd love it. There it is. Finding a topic of conversation, an awkward attempt to show interest." Edwin didn't even know that I stopped watching TV almost a year ago, after I started having vision problems. Now I mostly listen to audiobooks. We talked about nothing for a while longer, and he disconnected. I put the phone down and went back to the photo album. But the mood was ruined. My thoughts now revolved around the upcoming dinner and what my dear in-laws were really up to. Saturday morning, Audrey called. It was even more unusual. She rarely called me herself. Usually it was through Edwin. "Daddy," she said in that special tone of voice she used when she wanted something, "I'm so glad you agreed to dinner. I'm already looking forward to our evening." "Yeah, Audrey, me too," I lied. "You're going to wear that blue jacket we got you for Christmas, aren't you? It looks so good on you." "Gift? That's a good one. The jacket was bought with my own money, like all their gifts to me over the years." "Maybe," I said evasively. "And Daddy," she continued, "let's meet right at the restaurant, okay? Edwin and I will be downtown on business, so we'll stop by from there. On business on Sunday." Sure. They were probably planning to do some shopping after dinner, and they needed a separate car so I wouldn't know about it. "Whatever you say, Audrey. You're so understanding. See you tomorrow, kisses." When I hung up the phone, I looked out the window at my garden for a long time. Phyllis loved gardening, and it used to be full of color and fragrance. Now the garden is tended by a gardener I pay, and although it looks well tended, something is missing. The love with which Phyllis touched every plant. I spent all day Saturday and most of Sunday in anxious anticipation. I tried to occupy myself with reading, but my thoughts kept returning to the coming dinner. What is it this time? A new car? Renovation of the second floor? A vacation in the Maldives? Or something more serious? A real estate investment? A business? A stock? As evening approached, my anxiety grew. I remembered our last dinner at the restaurant 3 months ago. Edwin had announced then that he and Audrey needed to update their closet for summer. "You don't want your son and his wife to look like poor people, do you, Dad?" So I wrote a check for $5,000, and they both scattered in gratitude. A week later, Audrey posted pictures of her new handbag collection on social media. The $5,000 was gone, and before that, there was the situation with their barbecue. They needed a new grill and patio furniture to host important people. 10 grand. And not once did they invite me to these important people receptions. The funny thing is, I could have stopped this financial support a long time ago. I'm a well-to-do man, but I'm not rich. I have savings, a house with no mortgage, a stable business. I could live peacefully and not count every dollar if it weren't for the monthly infusions into Edwin and Audrey's bottomless barrel of needs. In the last 10 years, I had given them a sum that could have been used to buy a small house. At 6:30, I left the house and got into my automobile. 5 years ago, I'd bought myself a modest Japanese-made sedan, practical, economical, with good clearance for my bad knees. Edwin said then that I could afford something more representative. Presentable for who? For him when he occasionally takes my car. As I drove through the evening streets of Overland Park, memories of our other encounters came to mind. Christmas 3 years ago, when they'd forgotten to buy me a gift, but talked at length about their new Apple Watch. There's Father's Day, when Edwin emailed a card. He didn't even bother to pick out a real card. Here's my 75th birthday, when they were 2 hours late because Audrey needed to finish her treatments at the spa. Every encounter, every conversation, every dinner together, it was all infused with their indifference to me as a person and their increased focus on my wallet. And every time I resigned myself to it, gave in, paid. Because I was afraid of loneliness, because somewhere in the back of my mind I hoped that Edwin was my son after all, and blood couldn't turn to water, or just out of inertia, because it was easier that way. I parked in front of the restaurant at 7 p.m. sharp. Le Provençal was housed in an old restored red brick building. Through the large windows you could see white tablecloths, sparkling glass and silver, flickering candles. Very pretentious and very expensive. Typical Audrey's choice. Once inside, I noticed them immediately. They were sitting at a table by the window. Edwin in a new gray suit, Audrey in a dress that looked like it cost more than a month's rent at my print shop. They were laughing about something, looking at Audrey's smartphone. They didn't notice my appearance, and I paused for a moment, watching them from the sidelines. My son, my only child. Phyllis had given birth to him so hard, the doctors said we couldn't have any more children. We put everything into him. Love, time, money, hopes. And here was the result. A 90-year-old man living off his father with no remorse whatsoever. I took a deep breath and walked over to the table. Audrey was the first to see me, and she smiled her trademark smile. "Daddy, you're here. We already ordered champagne." "Hi, Daddy." Edwin came up to give me a hug. He smelled of expensive cologne and seemed to have had a drink before I arrived. I sat down across from them, feeling like I was being interrogated. I remembered all the times they'd sat across from me like that, exchanging glances before they made their little request. "It's so nice here, isn't it?" Audrey chirped, looking around. "I read in a magazine that the chef used to work in a 3-star restaurant in Lyon." "Very impressive," I said, unfolding the menu. The prices were exactly what I expected. Astronomical. "Don't look at the prices, Papa," Edwin said, catching my eye. "It's our treat tonight, remember?" "Of course," I smiled, but there was a growing sense of unease inside. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. The waiter came over with a bottle of champagne, which, judging by the label, I estimated at about $300. They'd really decided to let the dust settle. But why? As they poured us champagne, Audrey chatted nonstop about the restaurant, about the new spa that had opened nearby, about how hard it was for her to find a good hairdresser in Overland Park. I nodded in feigned interest, though my thoughts were far away. I remembered Phyllis getting her hair cut at the simple barbershop around the corner, and how she always looked elegant without any designer outfits or expensive treatments. We ordered. Audrey chose the most expensive dish on the menu, foie gras and lobster. Edwin ordered steak, also from the top price category. I limited myself to soup and salad, no appetite. "Dad, you don't look well," Edwin said suddenly, feigning concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," I answered. "Just tired." "You need more rest," Audrey interjected. "Maybe you should think about working less. At your age, after all." "Here it comes. Here it comes." "A lot of people my age are still working," I said, "and they feel great." "Sure, sure," she agreed quickly. "I'm just worried about you." Edwin took a big sip of champagne and winked at his wife. They were clearly getting ready for something. So what's new in your life? I asked, deciding not to pull the cat by the tail. Any special occasions for celebration? Well, yes, actually. Edwin fidgeted in his chair. We have great news, Dad. Audrey glowed and put her hand on her husband's arm. Edwin has found an amazing investment opportunity, she announced. It's going to change our lives. That was it. I felt my insides tighten. Investment opportunity in my son's mouth usually meant a quick way to lose money. What kind of opportunity I asked, trying to sound neutral. It's a revolutionary technology startup. Edwin's eyes lit up. They're developing an app that will change the way people interact with, he hesitated, with the environment. With the environment, I repeated. How exactly? It's hard to explain, Audrey interjected. It's a very technical thing. But my cousin Frederick knows the founder personally, and he says it's a gold mine. Cousin Frederick, the same one who 3 years ago talked them into investing in some absurd business, selling vitaminized water for houseplants? Then they lost $10,000, my $10,000, and didn't even apologize. And how much for this, gold mine? I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. Edwin and Audrey exchanged glances. Well, to get a really meaningful stake and a good return on investment. Edwin began in a businesslike tone I hadn't heard from him since college. We'd need to invest about $50,000. I almost choked on my champagne. 50,000? That was the largest amount they'd ever asked for. And where are you going to get that kind of money? I asked, knowing full well the answer. Well, Dad, Edwin paused, we thought you might be able to help. It's an investment in our future. Frederick says that in a year's time, the value of the stock could increase tenfold. And if it doesn't? I looked him straight in the eye. Well, there's risk everywhere. He looked away. But this is a proven team. They already have a prototype and where's the money-back guarantee? I interrupted. Do you have a business plan? Financial projections? Do you even know the name of this company? Edwin exchanged another glance with Audrey. It was obvious they didn't know even the basic details. Eco-green tech or something like that, he said uncertainly. But that doesn't matter, Dad. What matters is that this is our chance to finally get back on our feet and not bother you anymore. Don't bother me, I repeated. How nice of you. The waiter brought our entrees and there was an awkward pause for a few minutes. I stared at my soup, but my appetite was gone. Edwin and Audrey, on the other hand, pounced on their expensive dishes with enthusiasm. This is delicious, Audrey exclaimed, putting a piece of foie gras into her mouth. Daddy, you have to try it. I shook my head. I felt like I was participating in some ridiculous spectacle. They'd taken me to an expensive restaurant, ordered champagne and gourmet meals, all before asking me for $50,000 for another adventure. And what's most absurd is that they actually believed I would agree again. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd say yes again, like I'd said yes all these years. Write a check, mumble something about this being the last time, and go back to my empty house feeling used and empty. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was the frustration built up over the years. Maybe it was the memory of Phyllis, who always said we were spoiling our son too much. Or maybe it was just that I was finally tired of being an ATM for my ungrateful relatives. I watched them eat and drink and laugh, fully confident that they would get what they came for. And I could feel the anger building up inside me, quiet, cold, and determined. Our dishes were almost empty, and the conversation about the brilliant investment opportunity was still going on. Edwin, inebriated with champagne, was gesticulating vividly, describing the fantastic prospects of a startup that he himself knew only from the words of his wife's dubious cousin. Can you imagine, Dad? They are predicting an IPO as early as next year. His voice was getting louder and louder. Frederick says it's like Google in the beginning. Google, that is. I slowly stirred the long cold soup I had barely touched. Exactly. Audrey picked up the theme with enthusiasm. Frederick actually thinks we could have asked for $75,000, but we decided to be modest. Modest. I could barely contain a bitter laugh. $50,000 is their idea of modesty, the kind of money most people work a year for. What about your latest business project? I asked, remembering their previous venture. That online organic cosmetics store you launched last spring? I think it took $20,000. Edwin and Audrey exchanged quick glances. It was just a trial project, Edwin said. We learned a lot. The only thing you learned, I said quietly, is how to spend my money. There was an awkward pause. As if sensing the tension, a waiter materialized next to our table. Would you like dessert? He asked with a professional smile. Our chef prepared a delicious chocolate souffle with raspberry sauce today. Yes, Audrey said instantly, without even looking at me. And a bottle of that wonderful dessert wine you recommended to go with the souffle. Excellent choice, ma'am. The waiter nodded and left. I looked at them carefully. They really didn't see anything odd about ordering expensive wine and desserts before they got my agreement to their modest request for $50,000. In their eyes, I was probably just an ATM machine that always says yes. How's your printing business, Dad? Edwin suddenly asked, clearly trying to lighten the atmosphere. Still profitable in the digital age? It was rare to be asked about my work. Usually they avoided the subject, as if my business was something shameful. But now that they wanted my money, they were suddenly interested. The print shop is doing well, I answered with restraint. We have a lot of corporate clients who still need quality printed material. But you realize that the future is digital. Edwin adopted a mentoring tone. You might want to think about selling the business while it's still worth something. And there it is. The true purpose of this whole show. Not just 50 grand for a dubious startup. They wanted me to sell the print shop, my business that I'd spent 4 decades building. The source of my financial independence, and frankly, the only thing that had given me a sense of purpose since Phyllis's death. Sell the print shop, I repeated slowly, feeling the cold rage building up inside. What am I supposed to do after that? Enjoy my pension, of course, Audrey exclaimed, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Travel, take vacations. We could even travel together sometimes. Sometimes. How generous. And the money from the sale, I asked directly, where do you think it would go? Well, part of it you could invest in our startup, Edwin answered quickly. And the rest? Well, put it in an account for the future. For our future, he wanted to say. Their future. The waiter returned with a dessert wine and 3 servings of souffle. I didn't even remember agreeing to dessert, but Audrey had obviously ordered for everyone. This is absolutely delicious, she exclaimed after tasting the first spoonful. Daddy, you have to try it. I mechanically brought my spoon to the dessert, but I didn't eat. Suddenly, it all seemed to me like a surreal play. My son and his wife, dressed in expensive outfits bought with my money, sitting in a luxurious restaurant, paid for by me, eating exquisite food at my expense, and at the same time discussing how to get more money from me, how to make me sell my life's work. So what do you think, Dad? Edwin looked at me expectantly. About the startup and maybe selling the print shop? I looked at both of them, my 49-year-old son, who had never really worked, and his wife, who in 20 years had never once inquired about my life except in the context of my money. I think it's time for you both to grow up, I said finally. Edwin choked on his wine. What? You heard me. Grow up. Get a job. Live within our means. Stop milking your old man father. Dad, you're being unfair. Edwin's face turned resentful. We're just asking you to support a promising project. We've always been there for you, taking care of you. Cared? I grinned bitterly. When I went to the hospital with my knee last year, you didn't even come to see me, but you called a week later to ask if my monthly remittance would be delayed. We had important things to do, Audrey interjected. Edwin was in the middle of that marketing consultancy, which went nowhere, I finished, like all his previous projects. You don't understand modern business, Dad. Edwin was getting annoyed. In startup culture, it's normal to have a few failures before a big breakthrough. A breakthrough? I shook my head. Edwin, you're almost 50. When are you planning this breakthrough? At 70? My son's face turned red. Not everyone can be as boring and predictable as you are, with your prehistoric typography, he blurted out. Some of us aspire to more. More? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You aspire to nothing but my wallet. All your life you've done nothing but take. First you took my time, then my money, and now you want to take my business. The waiter brought the bill and discreetly placed it on the table. Edwin and Audrey didn't even look in his direction. They knew for sure I was going to pay. I took the bill and whistled. $678 for one dinner. We thought we were buying tonight, Audrey said uncertainly as she watched me pull out my wallet. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What were you going to pay with? It's not like you have no job, no income, no savings. We were planning to use a credit card, Edwin answered, not looking me in the eye. The one I pay off every month? They didn't say anything. I pulled out the credit card, signed the check, and added a generous tip. At least the waiter was actually working today. As I tucked my wallet back into the inside pocket of my jacket, Edwin suddenly slammed his palm on the table, drawing the attention of the neighboring tables. Dad, enough of this, he said in a loud whisper. We're trying to do you a favor by inviting you to a nice dinner to discuss a mutually beneficial business proposal, and you're acting like we're some kind of criminals. A favor? I shook my head. Edwin, you just asked me for $50,000 and offered to sell the business I've spent a lifetime building. What kind of favor is that? Jesus, Dad, he rolled his eyes. You're always dramatizing everything. Like you need all that money. You're 76 years old. How much longer do you plan to live? The restaurant suddenly became very quiet. Edwin seemed to realize only now what he had said. Audrey turned white and grabbed his arm. Edwin, he didn't mean it, Daddy. She tried to correct the situation. It's just that, at your age, you don't need a lot of what? I interrupted. A lot of joy? A lot of respect? A lot of love from your own children? You know we love you, Edwin said, but his voice sounded insincere, even to my old ears. I looked at them both, and for the first time I saw them for real two selfish, spoiled people who saw me only as a source of funding for their irresponsible lifestyles. Not a father, not a human being, just a wallet. Tell him, Edwin, Audrey said suddenly, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Tell him the truth about the startup. My son looked embarrassed. Now's not the time, Audrey. What truth? I asked. Well, Edwin drummed his fingers nervously on the table. We don't really need 50,000, but 75,000. And the startup? Well, it's not exactly environmental. What is it? I sensed we were getting to the point. It's an online casino app, he finally admitted, with a special algorithm that supposedly increases the odds of winning. Frederick says they found a legal loophole. Casino, I repeated. You want me to invest $75,000 in an online casino that promises the impossible and uses some loopholes? That sounds worse than it is, Edwin muttered. You just have to trust me. Trust you, I shook my head. After all your failed projects, after all the money I've invested in you with no return. But we're family, Edwin was indignant. A family should support each other. A family is not a one-way street, I replied. In 20 years, you've never once asked me how I was coping after Mom died. Not once have you asked about my health. Never once offered to help. Just took and took and took. Edwin opened his mouth to object, but Audrey got up from the table. I need to powder my nose, she announced and headed toward the restrooms, leaving the two of us alone. As soon as she was out of sight, Edwin leaned closer. Look, Dad, I realize it doesn't sound like much, but trust me, this time it's serious. Frederick says they can triple their investment in 6 months. And as for the printing plant, well, it's just business, right? If there's a good offer, why not sell? I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When did the child I loved with all my heart turn into this stranger? Edwin, I won't sell the print shop, and I'm not giving a dime to this casino. He leaned back in his chair, his face suddenly hard. You know, Dad, sometimes you can be such a stubborn old man. Yeah, I'm an old man, I agreed. An old man who worked his whole life so his son could have a good life. And this is how you thank me? Oh, of course, Edwin grinned sarcastically. It's going to be a story about how you worked your ass off to give me the best of everything. I've heard it 1,000,000 times. And I've heard 1,000,000 times about your brilliant ideas that never come to fruition, I countered. But that's enough, Edwin. No more money. Get a job like normal people. Audrey returned to the table, her face shining with a fresh coat of makeup. She enthusiastically beckoned to the waiter. We'd like to see the liquor menu, she announced, and maybe order another dessert. Do you have anything with truffles? She didn't even look at me. Pretty sure I was going to continue paying for this plague feast. Edwin winked at her as if to say, Don't worry, the old man will pay. And then something in me snapped, completely and irrevocably. Edwin leaned toward Audrey and said loud enough for me to hear, "Don't worry, dear. You know Daddy, he's just a wallet." Audrey laughed, loud and shrill, as if it was the funniest joke she had ever heard. "Oh, Edwin, you're so funny." She turned to the waiter. "Do you have any more expensive champagne? We're celebrating a new business opportunity." That was the moment I realized I'd had enough. I stood up abruptly, my chair sliding off the polished floor with a loud creak. "Enough!" I said so loudly that several neighboring tables fell silent and turned in our direction. Edwin and Audrey froze with a look of utter shock on their faces. "Dad, are you okay?" Edwin asked uncertainly. "No, I'm not okay," I replied, feeling my voice shake. "And I won't be fine as long as you two think I'm an ATM machine." "What are you talking about?" Audrey smiled nervously. "We're just kidding, Daddy." "No, you're not kidding. You really only see me as a source of money. But that's over. I'm not funding you anymore. Not a dime. Ever." "Dad, you can't be serious." Edwin stood up, trying to take my hand. "You know we love you." "No, you love my money," I yanked my hand away. "But now you're going to have to learn to live without it. Get a job, cut your expenses, do whatever you want, but don't come to me for money anymore." Edwin and Audrey's faces turned pale. They looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "You can't do this to us," Audrey hissed, her mask of pleasant daughter-in-law instantly disappearing. "After all we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked. "Drained my bank account? Used my grief for Phyllis to manipulate me? Thank you, but I'm done." I turned around and headed for the exit, feeling oddly relieved, like I dropped a heavy backpack I'd been lugging around for years. Behind me, I could hear Edwin yelling something, Audrey demanding I come back, the waiter awkwardly asking if everything was okay. But I didn't look back. I was walking forward, toward the restaurant doors, toward my car, toward a new life in which I would no longer be someone else's wallet. I drove home from the restaurant in a strange state of mind. My heart was pounding like a marathon. My hands on the steering wheel were shaking slightly, but my head was surprisingly clear. It was as if the fog that had enveloped my life for the past few years had suddenly dissipated. The dark streets of Overland Park floated by outside the window, and I kept trying to make sense of what had happened. I'd done it. I'd finally done something I'd thought about for years but never dared to do. I parked outside the house and sat in the car for a long time. It was raining lightly, drops dripping down the windshield, blurring the light from the streetlights. My house, large and empty, stared back at me through dark windows. Once there had been laughter, the voices of Phyllis and little Edwin, the smell of fresh-baked goods. Now there was only the echo of footsteps through empty rooms. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of the empty house did not evoke the usual longing. Instead, I felt a strange excitement, as if I were on the threshold of something new. When I entered the house, the first thing I did was turn off the phone. I knew the calls would be coming, and I wasn't ready for this conversation. Not now when my insides were still buzzing from the experience. I turned on the kettle, pulled out the old Whitman volume Phyllis had given me for our first anniversary, and settled into the chair by the window. I celebrate myself and sing to myself. Those lines had always resonated with me, but today they sounded new. I had lived a life that was not my own for so many years, allowing my son and daughter-in-law to use me, to belittle me, to ignore my needs and desires. Finally, at 76, I felt I could celebrate myself. That night I slept like a dead man, without the usual insomnia and anxious thoughts. Waking up in the morning, I felt energized for the first time in a long time. After breakfast, I found 11 messages from Edwin and 4 from Audrey on the landline answering machine, but I didn't listen to them. Instead, I went down to the basement where my old cameras were stored. Before I got married, I was into photography, even won small local competitions. Then came family, business, responsibilities, and my hobby took a back seat. After Phyllis died, I went down to the basement a couple times to look at my camera collection, but I never decided to return to the hobby. Like it was a betrayal to her, like I had no right to enjoy anything when she wasn't around. But today was different. I carefully took out my favorite Nikon, dusted it off, checked the shutter. To my surprise, everything worked. I found some old film, charged the machine, and went up to the garden. It was a clear spring morning. Everything around me was breathing life. I began to photograph. Dewdrops on leaves, crack patterns on an old garden sculpture, the play of light in the crown of a maple tree. The sound of the doorbell brought me back to reality. Edwin stood on the doorstep, pale and disheveled, as if he'd been up all night. "Dad, we need to talk," he blurted out as soon as I opened the door. "Good morning, Edwin," I said calmly, still holding the camera. "You're taking pictures?" He looked surprised. "I didn't realize you were still doing it." "I've just started again." I stepped aside, letting him into the house. "Do you want tea?" Edwin blinked in confusion. Usually our conversations began with his problems, his needs. My calm and casual question about tea seemed to confuse him. "Dad, about yesterday," he began, walking into the living room. "I must apologize. Audrey and we had a little too much wine, and I said something stupid. Of course, you're not just a wallet to us." "Who is?" I asked, putting the kettle on. "You're my father." He spread his hands as if that explained everything. "We're family." "And what does that mean to you, Edwin? To be a family?" He hesitated, apparently not expecting such a question. "Well, it means supporting each other," he finally answered. "How have you supported me all these years?" I asked, pulling out the cups. "When I was sick, when I was lonely, when I needed help with the house?" "I've had my own problems, Dad." He started to get annoyed. "It's not as simple as that." "No, Edwin, it's very simple." I put a cup of tea in front of him. "You and Audrey only see me as a source of money. You only come here when you need something. You're not interested in my life, my feelings, my interests." "It's not fair," he exclaimed. "We visit you often." "For what purpose?" He fell silent with his lips pressed together. "Look, Dad," he finally said, clearly changing his tactics. "I know you're upset about yesterday. I did say something stupid, and I'm sorry. But you can't just throw away years of a relationship over one mistake. Not one," I shook my head. "Hundreds. Thousands of moments when you showed me that you were only interested in my money, not me. And now what?" There was a note of panic in his voice. "Are you really not going to help us anymore? How are we going to live? That's it. Not how do we repair our relationship? Not how can I regain your trust? But how do we live without your money?" Edwin didn't even try to hide the real reason for his visit. "The same way most people do," I replied. "By getting a job." "At my age?" He grinned. "Who needs me?" "You're 49, Edwin, not 90. People start new careers at 62. "That's all easy to say." He stood up and paced the room. "You don't realize how complicated it is. We have mortgages, car loans, country club memberships." "Which I'm paying for," I reminded him. "Maybe you should think about living within your means." He stopped and gave me a long look. "You really mean it, don't you?" There was disbelief in his voice. "You would abandon your own son to his fate?" "I'm not abandoning you, Edwin. I'm just not providing for you anymore. There's a difference." "There is no difference." He raised his voice. "You know that without your help we'll lose the house, the cars, everything." "Then maybe you should rethink your lifestyle." I shrugged. "Sell the house, buy something more modest, sell one car, give up a membership to a club you barely use. You want us to live like beggars?" There's a look of genuine outrage on his face. "Your own son to live in a shithole?" "There's a huge difference between a hole and a house that matches your real capabilities." I looked at him calmly. "Millions of people live without financial support from their parents and somehow manage." Edwin grabbed the phone and dialed a number. "Audrey," he said when his wife answered. "Come over soon." He wasn't kidding. 20 minutes later, Audrey appeared on the doorstep. Her usually flawless makeup looked a little sloppy today, and there was anxiety in her eyes. "Daddy," she rushed over to me with open arms. "We've been so worried about you." I pulled back, avoiding the hug. "There was no need for that, Audrey. I'm perfectly fine." She froze for a moment, then her face took on a hurt expression. "Are you still angry about last night?" Edwin was just making a bad joke. We were both a little tipsy. "It wasn't about last night." I sat back in my chair. "It's not just about him. It's about our entire relationship over the last few years." "What are you talking about?" She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear nervously. "We have a great relationship." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "When was the last time you asked about my health?" or about the printing press, or anything that wasn't about money? Yeah, I always ask how you're doing, she stammered. Yes, a formal, how are you doing, Daddy? Before moving on to a list of your new needs, I nodded. That's not a real interest, Audrey. They glanced over to Edwin, clearly unsure of how to respond to my calm but firm tone. Dad, Edwin decided to change tactics. Let's be practical. You can't just stop supporting us financially without any warning. We have commitments, plans. I've warned you many times over the years, I replied. I told you that it was time for you to get a job, that I wouldn't last forever, that you had to learn to live within your means. You never listened. But not so harshly, Audrey exclaimed. We need time to readjust. You've had 20 years, I shrugged. 20 years when you could have prepared to live on your own. And now what? Edwin spread his hands. What do we do? Begging on the street. Get a job, I repeated patiently. Any job. Start small and move forward, like all normal people do. At my age, with my education, I can't work anywhere. He resented me. I have a degree in business administration, which you haven't used in the last 15 years, I reminded him. Edwin, I'm not going to argue. My decision is final. No financial aid from now on. Audrey suddenly cried, covering her face with her hands. How can you be so cruel, she sobbed. After all we've done for you? And what exactly have you done for me, Audrey? I asked sincerely, really trying to remember something. We were there for you. She lifted her tear-stained face. We visited you. We called you. When you needed money, I finished. Only then. That's not true, Edwin exclaimed. We called you at Christmas, on your birthday. Sometimes, I nodded. And almost always those calls ended with a request for money. They fell silent, apparently unable to find an argument. I looked at them and felt a strange calmness. No anger, no desire for revenge or pain. Just a clear understanding that it couldn't go on like this. Look, I softened my tone. I'm not trying to punish you or hurt you. I'm just not going to be your ATM anymore. I'm 76 years old and I want to live my remaining years in peace, doing the things I enjoy, not worrying about how much money I have to give away this month. What are we supposed to do right now? Edwin sounded really desperate. We have a mortgage payment in a week. Sell something, I suggested. Audrey probably has a few tens of thousands worth of jewelry and designer handbags. You want me to sell my stuff? Audrey looked genuinely shocked. If the alternative is losing the house, then yes, I shrugged. It's called prioritizing, Audrey. Adults do it all the time. They looked at each other again, and I saw their faces change from shock and indignation to calculation. I already knew what was coming next. Dad, Edwin sat down on the arm of my chair and put his hand on my shoulder. I understand that you're upset, and you're right. We haven't always been attentive to you. We'll fix that, I promise. But right now, we really need your help. One last time. One last time, I shook my head. How many times have I heard you say that? I mean it this time. His voice sounded almost sincere. Help us now, and then I'll get a job, I promise. We'll visit you more often. We'll take care of you. Do you hear yourself, Edwin? I gently removed his hand from my shoulder. You're offering me a deal. I give you the money, and in return, you show me some basic filial concern? It should be natural, not bargained for. He stepped back, his face reddening. All right, he said at last. Since you're so principled, we'll manage on our own. But don't complain about being lonely. There it was, his true face, threatening to cut off my social life if I didn't pay, as if their infrequent visits to ask for money could be called socializing. I'd rather be alone than with people who only see me as a wallet, I replied calmly. Audrey suddenly came over to me and knelt down, taking my hands in hers. Daddy, her voice trembled, her eyes glistening with tears. I know we haven't always been perfect, but we love you. We really do. And right now we're in a desperate situation. If only you could help us with this mortgage payment. Just $25,000, and we'd never ask for anything else. I looked into her eyes and all I saw was calculation. She was a good actress, but years of watching her had taught me to see the falseness. No, Audrey, I released my hands gently. Not a dime more. She rose abruptly, all pretended tenderness gone from her face. Sir, you'll regret this, she hissed. You stubborn old fool. Audrey, Edwin urged her on. but there was no real reproach in his voice. "No, let him know." She turned to him. "We've put up with him all these years, listening to his boring stories, pretending to be interested in his miserable print shop. And now when we really need help, he's abandoning us." "Put up with me," I repeated quietly. "So that's how it was for you then." Edwin took a step forward, trying to make amends. "Dad, that's not what Audrey meant. She's just upset." "No, that's exactly what she meant." I stood up. "And you know what? I'm grateful for this honesty. We're finally telling the truth." "Dad, I think you should go." I pointed to the door. "I need to develop some film." "Tape?" Edwin looked confused. "What film?" "From the camera." I picked up the Nikon, which was still on the table. I went back to the picture. "While your son could lose his house, you're playing with your ancient camera?" Audrey didn't hide her contempt. "It's just soulless?" I prompted. "Maybe, but no more callous than calling your father a wallet." They left, slamming the door. I was alone in the silence of the house, which suddenly seemed not so empty. I went to the window and watched them get into their expensive German automobile, bought with my money. Audrey was saying something furiously, waving her arms. Edwin looked depressed. I knew this wasn't the end. They would come back with new strategies, new manipulations, new attempts to get to my wallet. But for the first time in years, I felt the strength to stand up to it. Taking my camera, I went back to the garden. The sun was high, illuminating the blooming flowers Phyllis had once planted along the path. I began to take pictures, feeling each click of the shutter as if it were taking me away from my past life, where I was just an ATM machine for my son, and bringing me closer to a new one, where I could finally just be myself. It's been 2 weeks since that memorable dinner at the restaurant. 2 weeks of my new life. I've returned to photography with the enthusiasm of a teenager getting his first camera. I developed the very film I had started with the day of the scandal with my son and was pleasantly surprised by the results. The hands remembered, the eye had not lost accuracy. After so many years of interruption, it seemed like a small miracle. I set up a dark room in the basement, just like in the old days. I got boxes of chemicals from the closet, special trays, red light lanterns. A lot of things had to be reordered. Paper, developer, fixer. The internet was indispensable here. Who would have thought that in the era of digital photography, analog materials could still be easily found? As it turned out, film photography was experiencing a kind of renaissance among young people. I also resumed my morning walks. Phyllis and I used to walk for an hour every morning, regardless of the weather. After her death, I had abandoned that habit, preferring to stay at home where everything reminded me of her. Now I'd started going out again at dawn, camera around my neck, exploring the streets of Overland Park that were familiar and yet had changed over the years. On one such walk, I met Howard Pratt, an old buddy of mine. We had once played poker together every Wednesday night, but after Phyllis died, I had distanced myself from all my friends, sinking into my own shell. "Randall Higginbotham," Howard exclaimed when he saw me in the alley of the city park. "How many years? How many winters?" He had aged as well as I had, but his eyes still shone with a lively interest in the world. We hugged and I felt something inside me thaw. "Do you still have poker company on Wednesdays?" I asked. "Of course," Howard clapped me on the shoulder. "But now we play at the community center instead of the garage. Arthritis, you know. We need more light and heat. Can I hesitated, suddenly feeling unsure. "Can I join this Wednesday?" Howard's face lit up with a wide smile. "Randy, we've been waiting 10 years for this question. Of course you can come. The guys will be thrilled." So I returned to the poker company, where I was greeted with such warmth it brought tears to my eyes. Tommy Finch, Lloyd Burroughs, Samuel Ackerley, they all got older. Some had grandchildren, some were widowed like me, but the friendship never faded. We didn't gamble for big money, more for socializing and excitement. We talked about politics, sports, health, everything that interested men of our age. None of them ever asked why I had disappeared for 10 years. They just accepted me back as if I had never disappeared. There's something special about true male friendship, the ability to pick up where they left off without too many questions or recriminations. My life began to fill with new colors. I spent my mornings photographing, my days at the print shop, which, contrary to Edwin's predictions, continued to bring in a steady income, and my evenings reading or hanging out with old friends. On weekends, I began to visit the local contemporary art gallery, where I discovered many talented young photographers. One day at an exhibition, I got talking to the curator, a young woman named Wendy Palmer. Seeing my interest in a particular style of black and white photography, she suggested I bring my work in for evaluation. "We have a section for local amateur photographers," she said. The very thought that my images could hang on the walls of the gallery was awe-inspiring. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Alive and free of the burden I had placed on myself by indulging my son and daughter-in-law's selfishness. It wasn't that I didn't miss Edwin at all, he was my only child after all. But I needed that distance to realize how toxic our relationship was. Of course, Edwin and Audrey didn't give up so easily. They received countless calls, texts, and even emails from them over the course of those 2 weeks. They went through the full spectrum of emotions and tactics, from anger, "You heartless, selfish man," to pleading, "Daddy, we're on the verge of eviction," to blackmail, "You'll never see us again," to fake remorse, "We've realized our mistakes, give us another chance." I remained adamant. I didn't return phone calls, I deleted messages, I put emails in my desk drawer unread. Perhaps it was cruel, but I knew that if I showed weakness, I would be caught in their web of manipulation again. Soon, however, Edwin and Audrey's strategy changed. They switched from direct attacks to more sophisticated methods. The first signal was a call from my old business partner, Henry Hudson. We started a printing business together, and then he sold me his share and moved to Florida. We didn't talk much, mostly on holidays. "Randall, are you all right?" he asked without preamble. "Of course I am, Henry. Why?" "I got a call from your son," he said with concern in his voice. "He said you were having memory problems, making strange financial decisions, refusing help." I could see where this was going. Edwin started spreading rumors about me supposedly losing my mind. Classic tactic: if you can't get a man to give you money, convince everyone he's incapacitated. "Henry," I replied calmly, "there's nothing wrong with my memory or my judgment. The only weird decision I've made recently is to stop being an ATM for my great-age son, who, at 49, is still living off me." I told him the whole story without hiding the details. Henry listened attentively, occasionally inserting a surprised exclamation. "Damn it, Randy," he said at last. "I had no idea it was this messed up. You did the right thing to finally put a stop to it. And don't worry. If Edwin calls me again, I'll know what to say." After Henry's call, I wondered who else Edwin might have called. The list of potential victims of his campaign to discredit me was short. I'd long since lost most of my contacts, but it still existed. I decided to be proactive and called a few people who might be in Edwin's crosshairs. My lawyer, Peter Doyle, my family doctor, Dr. Birch, my accountant, Robert Cohen. My intuition didn't fail. Dr. Birch had already received a call from a concerned son who wondered if I was showing signs of dementia. Peter Doyle reported that Edwin had come to his office asking about the possibility of challenging my financial decisions if I were found to be incapacitated. And Robert Cohen said Audrey had called him trying to find out the status of my finances, under the pretext of helping to arrange care for me. All three assured me of their loyalty. They had known me for decades and had no doubts about my sanity. Dr. Birch even offered to issue an official report on my excellent mental health, to shut those vultures up, as he put it. But the campaign to discredit me didn't stop with business contacts. Soon I began to notice strange looks from my neighbors. Mrs. Parker across the street, who usually enjoyed chatting with me about her roses, now only nodded at me from a distance and quickly disappeared into the house. And Mr. Ramirez, with whom we sometimes tended the garden together, suddenly became very anxious to ask if I needed any help. The apogee was a visit from a social worker. One Tuesday, a young woman knocked on my door with a folder of papers. She introduced herself as Leslie Knowles from Elder Protective Services and said she had received an anonymous tip about possible self-neglect or financial exploitation. "Mr. Higginbotham," she said as she cautiously looked around my spotlessly clean home. "Thanks, Beatrice. We are required to screen all such reports. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" I invited her in and offered her tea. While the water was boiling, I told her the whole story, not hiding my disappointment in my son and daughter-in-law. I showed her albums of recent photos, told her about returning to hobbies and friends, showed her the printing company's paperwork, proving that the business was thriving under my leadership. Leslie listened intently, taking notes. "Mr. Higginbotham," she said, closing her notebook, "let me be frank with you. I see a man of full sanity who leads an active, organized life. You have a clean house, you are well-dressed, you eat right, you have hobbies and social connections. I'll close this request as unfounded." "Thank you," I smiled, "though I wouldn't be surprised if there is a new anonymous tip soon. If so," she handed me a business card, "call me directly. Unfortunately, I often see cases of elderly people trying to be controlled through finances or declared incapacitated for the sake of an inheritance. It's a form of abuse, and we take it very seriously." After Leslie left, I sat in my chair for a long time thinking about how low Edwin and Audrey had fallen in their attempts to get to my money. The son I'd raised was now trying to declare me crazy in order to gain control of my finances. It was painful, very painful, but I didn't let that pain paralyze me. On the contrary, it was further proof that I had made the right decision. If Edwin was willing to go that far for money, then our relationship was long past the point of being real. That night, I pulled out the photo albums of his childhood pictures. Little Edwin on the swings, Edwin with his first bicycle, Edwin in his graduation suit. When did it all go wrong? Were there signs of future selfishness even then? Or was it Audrey's influence? Or was it my own fault, spoiling him too much, indulging his every whim? In the morning, I took the selected pictures to the gallery. Wendy was delighted with my work, especially the series of black and white portraits of the homeless people I'd photographed at the soup kitchen in the town square. "There's so much dignity in their eyes here," she said as she looked at the pictures. "We agreed on a small exhibit at the local artists section in a month." As I left the gallery, I ran into Veronica Sheldon, an old friend of Phyllis's. We hadn't seen each other since the funeral. "Randall," she broke out in a smile, "how wonderful to see you. You look beautiful." "Thank you, Veronica," I hugged her. "How are you?" "Not as well as you, by the looks of it," she smiled slyly. "I hear you're having an exhibition? The whole town is talking about it." I laughed. "The whole town?" "I doubt it. It's just a small exhibit at the local gallery." "Don't be modest," she patted my arm. "By the way, I saw Edwin and Audrey at the supermarket yesterday. They looked not so good." "What do you mean?" "Well, Audrey was wearing no makeup, and dressed very plainly. And Edwin, he seemed annoyed. They were arguing at the register over some coupons. I wasn't surprised. Without my financial backing, they had to do some serious belt-tightening. Audrey told anyone who would listen that you were under the influence of some cult that was forcing you to break away from your family?" Veronica continued curiously. "Is it true?" I couldn't contain my laughter. "A cult? That's something new." "No, Veronica, the only cult I've fallen under is common sense and self-respect." I gave her a brief version of events. Veronica had always known Phyllis well and realized how disappointed she would be in Edwin. "Poor Philly," Veronica sighed. "She wanted so much for Edwin to grow up to be a responsible man. Remember how she insisted that he work part-time during the summer? And he always made excuses." "Yeah," I nodded. "She saw right through him, and she didn't approve of Audrey from the start." "None of us did," Veronica admitted. "But we kept quiet because we saw how much you valued your connection with your son. We agreed to meet for lunch next week." Another thread from the past I picked up, another step toward a fuller life. As I drove back home, I thought about how strange things had turned out. I had taken away my son's financial support, and he started spreading the wildest rumors about me, from dementia to joining a cult. In his eyes, the only explanation for my behavior could only be madness or someone else's bad influence. He simply couldn't imagine that I had made a conscious decision to stop being his ATM. But as painful as it was to realize that my own son only saw me as a source of money, I didn't regret the decision. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from manipulation, from perpetual guilt, from having to buy my own child's attention. A familiar German car was parked outside my house. Edwin and Audrey had come again. This time I was ready to meet them. No more concessions, no more compromises. It was time to finally set the record straight. It had been an unusually warm summer in Overland Park. My roses in the garden bloomed lushly and brightly, as if rejoicing with me in the freedom I had finally found. 3 months had passed since that evening in the restaurant, when I had said a firm no to my son and his greedy wife for the first time in years. 3 months of my new life. I was just returning from the gallery where my small photography exhibit was held. Wendy, the curator, was thrilled with the feedback from the visitors. My series of portraits of homeless people had caught the attention of the local newspaper, and the reporter even interviewed me. It was an unusual feeling to talk about myself, my work, my vision of the world through the lens of a camera. Before, all people were interested in talking to me about was my business, or in Edwin and Audrey's case, my bank account. As I pulled up to the house, I saw an unfamiliar used car in the driveway. Edwin was standing next to it, glancing nervously at his watch. He had changed considerably since I'd last seen him, slightly thinner, tanned, and strangely healthier looking, and he was dressed much simpler than usual. Jeans, t-shirt, work boots. I parked and got out of the car, preparing for another round of manipulation and demands, but Edwin surprised me. "Hi, Dad," he said, making no attempt to hug me or shake my hand. "Can we talk?" "Sure," I nodded toward the house. "You want to come in?" "If you don't mind, let's do it in the garden. I don't have much time. I have to be at work by 3. "Work?" That was new. We sat on garden chairs under an old maple tree I'd planted the year Edwin was born. "Are you working?" I asked, not hiding my surprise. "Yes," he nodded. "At a construction company, assistant manager. It's nothing special, but it's a start." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "How's Audrey?" "Audrey," he sighed. "We broke up. Or rather, she left me when it became clear that we couldn't live large anymore." I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. Edwin looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. "We had to sell the house," he continued. "The mortgage payments were too high. I live in a small apartment on the south side of town now. Audrey went to stay with her sister in Chicago." "I'm sorry," I said, though I didn't feel sorry for Audrey. "Don't be," Edwin looked me in the eye. "She was only with me for the money. Your money, to be exact." When it ran out, she showed her true colors. There was bitterness in his voice. I felt a pang of regret, not for my decision to end my financial support, but for the fact that my son had lived 20 years with a woman who saw him only as access to his father's money. "Why are you here, Edwin?" I asked bluntly. He was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to apologize," he finally said, "for everything. For the years I used you as an ATM machine. For not appreciating you as a father. For forgetting everything you and Mom tried to teach me." His words sounded sincere, but I knew my son too well. He was always a great actor. I raised an eyebrow. Nothing," he shrugged. "I'm not asking for money, if that's what you mean. I have enough to live on. The job's not dusty, it pays on time. I've even started saving a little." "I'm glad to hear that," I nodded. "But still, why the visit? What do you want?" "Maybe a second chance." He looked away. "Not as your dependent, but as your son. Just, a relationship?" I stared at him for a long time, trying to see the truth behind his words. Maybe losing everything, money, status, wife, had really made him reevaluate his life. But too much water has passed. Too many lies, manipulation, betrayal. "You know, Edwin," I finally said, "I think we both need time. For you to prove that you've really changed. For me to learn to trust you again." He nodded. "Fair enough," he agreed. "And by the way, one more thing. I told everyone the truth. Everyone I lied about you to before, saying you were out of your mind or in a cult. I admitted that was a lie and that you were always completely sane." "Why?" "That act surprised me the most." "Because it was the right thing to do," he shrugged, "and because I realized how petty and pathetic I'd been for spreading those rumors." We talked some more. Edwin told me that he'd found a job through an old college friend with whom he'd recently reconnected, that he had sold almost all of his expensive things to pay off his loans, that he'd started taking continuing education classes at night. When he left, I didn't offer him any money, and he didn't ask for any. It was probably the first conversation we'd had in years that didn't revolve around finances. I didn't know if he was sincere this time, but I decided to give him a chance to prove it over time. No promises, no commitments, just a chance to start fresh. After he left, I sat in the garden for a long time, thinking. The wind rustled in the crown of a maple tree. The sun's glare played on the surface of the small pond I'd recently set up to photograph reflections. This garden, like my whole life, was transforming day by day, becoming fuller and more harmonious. That evening, I got a call from Howard. "Randy, you're not going to believe this. I just ran into your son at the supermarket. He's working." "Yeah, I know." I couldn't hold back a chuckle. "He stopped by today." "How was it?" I could hear the curiosity in Howard's voice. "Did he ask for money again?" "Surprisingly, no." I told him about our conversation. "I don't know if I believe him this time." "Well, time will tell," Howard said philosophically. "In the meantime, are you going to the social luncheon tomorrow?" Sarah Jenkins promised to bring her famous apple pie. Community lunches on Tuesdays were another enjoyable part of my new life. People from our neighborhood would gather in the park. Everyone would bring a dish of some kind, and we would just chat, share news, and listen to music. I had never gone to these events before, preferring to lock myself away at home alone with my grief. Now I was enjoying the company of neighbors, many of whom I'd known for decades, but was only now really getting to know. "Of course I'm coming," I replied. "I promised Martha Simmons I'd show her the portrait I took last week." "Oh, she'll be thrilled with that. She's telling everyone about your exhibit." Howard laughed. "By the way, Tommy suggests we go fishing this Saturday. Would you like to come?" "I'd love to," I said. As I hung up the phone, I suddenly realized how much my life had changed in those 3 months. My days used to be filled with work, worrying about money for Edwin and Audrey, loneliness, and longing for Phyllis. Now every day brought something new. Meetings with friends, photography, exhibitions, social events. I never stopped missing Phyllis. That kind of love never fades. But now I remembered her with warm sadness, not acute pain. I began to notice how often I smiled when I thought of moments from our life together. She would approve of my changes, I was sure of it. Phyllis had always wanted me to live life to the fullest. A week after Edwin's visit, I ran into him again by chance, this time at the mall. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a young woman with a simple but pleasant face. He introduced her as Lucy, his coworker. They were having lunch together on their break. "Are you a photographer?" Lucy asked, recognizing me. "I've been to your exhibition. Your portraits are amazing." We talked a little about art. Edwin was silent, but he listened with interest. I noticed the way he looked at Lucy, with respect and warmth, not the way he had looked at Audrey. "Dad," he said as we said goodbye, "I'd like to come by sometime and see your new work, if you don't mind." "Come by anytime," I nodded. "Just call ahead. I have a pretty full schedule now." He smiled, and in that smile, for the first time in years, I saw a shadow of the old Edwin, the boy who had once looked at me with admiration when I showed him how a typewriter worked. In the early fall, Edwin told me he had found a new job, one with better pay and prospects for growth. He never asked for money again, although I knew he was struggling. Sometimes he came to see me, we drank tea, talked, carefully, skirting the sharp edges, gradually restoring some semblance of a relationship. Not as close as before, but not as toxic. I hadn't heard from Audrey. According to Edwin, she had married a wealthy businessman from Chicago. "She found a new wallet," he said with a bitter chuckle. I made no comment. My life, meanwhile, continued to fill with new colors. I started leading a photography class for seniors at the community center, started traveling more often, small weekend trips to neighboring states to photograph nature and architecture, expanded my printing business to include photo book and scrapbook services, which was unexpectedly in demand in the age of digital photography. My house no longer seemed empty and droning. Several times a week, I had friends gather at my house, sometimes for poker, sometimes just to chat over a glass of wine. Beatrice, my au pair, often brought her grandchildren, and their laughter filled the rooms with the life that had been missing for so long. One warm October day, I was sitting on a park bench watching the falling leaves. My trusty Nikon was lying nearby. I had just finished photographing fall landscapes for a new series. An elderly man, whom I often saw here on my walks, came over to me. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, looking at the golden foliage. "Magnificent," I agreed. "I often see you here with your camera." He nodded at my camera. Are you a professional photographer? More like a keen amateur, I smiled. In my old age, I returned to my old hobby. That's wonderful, he held out his hand. I'm Albert Clark, by the way. Randall Higginbotham. I shook his hand. Higginbotham? The print shop on Maple Street? That's the one. My daughter ordered her wedding invitations from you last year. Nice work. We got to talking. Albert was a former literature teacher with a passion for poetry and jazz. We found many common interests and agreed to meet sometime at a jazz cafe that had recently opened in the city center. As I drove home, I thought about how amazing life can be. At 76, I had made more friends than I had in decades, started a new career in photography, restored my dignity and self-respect. All because of one decision: to stop being an ATM for my son. Edwin was changing too, slowly with difficulty, but he was really growing up, albeit half a century late. Our relationship will never be the same, but perhaps it will become healthier. Time would tell. In the meantime, I enjoyed every day, every sunset, every cup of morning coffee on the veranda. I was no longer a prisoner of toxic relationships, no longer felt guilty for wanting to live my life. Sometimes I thought I could hear Phyllis's quiet laughter, as if she were nodding approvingly somewhere from heaven. In my 76 years, I finally felt truly free, and it was a wonderful feeling. While photographing the sunset in the park, I caught the silhouette of an old oak tree against the blazing sky, a majestic tree that had stood in that spot for probably more than a century, surviving storms and droughts, but still strong and beautiful. I pressed the shutter release, and in that moment I realized I had found the perfect metaphor for myself. Like this oak tree, I have weathered my storms, lost my beloved wife, disappointed with my only son, endured years of humiliation and manipulation. But like the oak tree, I still stood, strong, unyielding, ready for a new chapter of life, however short or long it might be. And it wasn't just good, it was beautiful.